welcome back. This is Sick World episode 2. I wanted to do a quick post about food. Even though I didn't really talk about it in my last video very much, the food you eat is obviously going to be very important to, your health goals and your overall health kind of throughout your life. So instead of talking about specific types of diets or foods I recommend, stuff like that, what I wanted to do was kind of touch on like a philosophy of food. I know that sounds a little kooky, but stick with me and you'll kind of get what I'm talking about. I think having a philosophy like this in your mind is going to make it a little bit easier to maneuver things like, your shopping list when you go shopping for groceries, what to make for dinner, things like that. That way you're not having to just memorize big lists of like foods, like, okay, this food's okay and this food isn't okay. Or trying to think too much about, is this going to fit into my specific diet? I talked about keto last time. Is this going to be keto enough? So you don't have to worry about that, at least not at first. So now I'm a Catholic, so my worldview is going to be rooted in like the Christian understanding of kind of how the world works. Even if you're not particularly religious, you can still kind of glean some meaning from what I'm about to say. So think about the Garden of Eden, okay? Adam and Eve, the creation story in Genesis, okay? So before the original sin, when God said everything is good, what did Adam and Eve's life look like? Well, what were they doing? If you think about it, their natural state, they were naked outside in nature, and they were eating foods that were growing naturally out in the sun. There's some kind of theological debate as to whether they would have been killing and eating animals, but that's not what this video is about. So even after the fall, though, it describes man as working the earth to bring about food for himself. So, agriculture, obviously. Even from a completely secular point of view, you can think about this, early humans. And even like modern day, like primitive tribes do the same stuff. They're hunter-gatherers. They go out and they search for food. They have some animal husbandry sometimes. They'll have like cows and livestock like that. And then some agriculture. Depends on the time period, the geographical location, stuff like that. So since the beginning of man, right up until pretty recently, the past couple hundred years or so, everything a human would eat, everything, would have been living the same life as a human. And what I mean by that is they're growing and living their entire lifespan under the sun, under God's sun, hanging in the sky as part of like an ecosystem, right? The food chain starts with plants, photosynthesis, absorbing the sunlight and turning it into nutrients for itself. The plant gets eaten by the animal gets eaten by you. So up until really the last century or two, everything that everyone ate would kind of fit into this nature cycle. That's kind of what I call it, just the nature cycle. So that's a little bit out there. What's my point with all that? My point is, and the philosophy that I have when it comes to food is that it's best to avoid the artificial, the processed, the man-made when it comes to the things you're consuming, and it's because they don't fit into this nature cycle. God didn't make mistakes creating this cycle of food, creating this food chain. To put it simply, man doesn't know better than nature about how a food should be made, right? Because it's been working pretty well for a while. When I talk about buying foods with no ingredients, this is really what I'm talking about. Beef is beef, an orange is an orange, an apple's an apple, and so on and so forth. Of course, putting aside the issue of things like pesticides and antibiotics, we're not going to talk about that right now. Just as a final illustration to kind of push my point here, I want to take a look at the ingredients list of something like a Pop-Tart. So we're going to look at, I think it's strawberry Pop-Tarts is the ingredient list that I grabbed. For right now, we're just going to ignore the main ingredients on the top, the main stuff it's made from. There's definitely some problems with those, but we're gonna gloss over that right now. We're gonna look at one specific ingredient on this list, just for one example of what I'm talking about when I kind of push this natural versus artificial stuff. So this ingredient, and I'll put it up on the screen here, is called Red 40. Now if I'm buying this Pop-Tart box at a store, I see this on the ingredient list, I don't know what Red 40 is. I've never seen a Red 40 tree growing Red 40 fruits. I've never heard of a chicken or a bird that that lays red 40 eggs, right? So I have no idea what this is. I'm just gonna go look it up. I'm gonna Google it. I'm gonna go and do an online search of what this red 40 is. What's it made of? So when I do that, I get this result. Red 40 is manufactured by coupling diazotized 5-amino 4-methoxy-2-toluene sulfonic acid with 6-hydroxy-2-naphthalene sulfonic acid in an azo coupling reaction. I have no idea what that means, so, let's scroll a little bit further and, oh, okay. Red dye 40 is a synthetic food dye made from petroleum. Petroleum, as in oil. So does that sound particularly edible to you, or like something you'd want to be consuming, on a regular basis, on purpose? Unless you're a car, which if you're watching this, I'm going to assume you're not a car, I'm going to assume the answer is no. The text snippet actually does go on, however. It continues with the following, and this is pulled from an article from Medical News Today. Research has shown that it is linked to certain ADHD symptoms such as hyperactivity and may also cause other neurobehavioral effects in children. Now I assume I can just kind of let that speak for itself, but just to drive the point home, not only is this crap made from petroleum, oil from the ground, it seems to have a neurological effect on children, which can exacerbate the behavioral symptoms of ADHD and things like that. Frankly, my opinion, if this affects children, it affects adults too. I don't see any reason why it would just stop affecting you. That doesn't really make any sense to me. This is admittedly anecdotal, but I knew someone who could personally attest to this. Her brother, who was around 18, which is not really a child when you think about it, around 18 years old, if he ate this red 40 stuff, anything with red 40, so we're talking about things like Twizzlers, soda, stuff like that, he would just be bouncing off the walls. Crazy. Sugar didn't do it. Caffeine didn't do it. It was just anything with this red 40 would just make him go nuts. So, but don't worry, because the article assures us at the beginning that this ingredient only increases ADHD symptoms by a small amount, most of the time. Right. Hopefully this illustration kind of, proves my point a little bit about the nature cycle that I touched on earlier. If you can change the way that you think about the food you eat and the environment you live in and how that affects your health, I think that'll make it much, much easier for you in the long run to be able to accomplish the goals that you have and to ultimately attain a higher level of health than you might have had. So that's really it for this video. As always, kind of let me know if you guys have any questions, you want any topics you want to hear about. I'll probably try and push more of these kind of shorter videos out, make them a little more digestible, easily consumed, so that you're not having to sit at your computer for a half hour listening to me mumble. And I'm hoping I'll be able to push these videos out more than once per week. There's a wasp flying around my head, so that's why I'm kind of glancing around. So yeah, remember, it's a sick world, but it doesn't have to be. So stay safe. I'll talk to you next time.